cumbersome, but Radoslaw Sikorski, one thing that from the first administration, Trump administration, from everything we've seen so far, the sort of the most optimistic approach comes from accepting he likes to do deals and he likes to announce peace, and many people have said he wants peace. The downside is perhaps that if he does a deal, he's going to want to lift sanctions, he's going to want to potentially remove all pressure from President Putin and Russia, even though many in Europe would still think he posed a serious threat. So I just wondered...
Well, that's speculation. What has actually happened is that the President of the United States has issued an ultimatum to Putin. Make terms of ending this war or else. And as I read Putin, he has a tendency to overplay his hand. And this is a moment to come to a deal, or the United States, President Trump is hinting, will get tougher. We're in a better place than we were 48 hours ago. And let's also remember that when Russia loses a war, historically, in the past, every time, after the Crimean War, after the Russo-Japanese War, after being knocked out of World War I, after losing in Afghanistan, after losing the Cold War, there are always reforms. So Ukraine winning this is important not just for Ukraine and for the European security architecture, but also for Russia and its people.
But at the same time, as Russia is being given the ultimatum, put under pressure potentially, we see a broadening, and a very kind of clear broadening of Russia's antagonism against the West. Only yesterday we had the UK Defence Minister announcing the aggressive moves of the Russian ship in the Channel. We've had much discussion around the Baltic and the cables. So, at the same time as this is happening, Putin is threatening Europe on a wider front and in potentially in a much more open way.
Well, of course. Putin is repeating the mistakes of Soviet leadership. The Soviet Union took on the West and lost. He himself is on the record saying that under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union overspent on the military and bankrupted the country. And he was very insistent that this mistake should not be repeated. And he's doing exactly that. Russia has taken on all of Europe, has antagonized countries that were previously friendly or neutral, Nordic countries, the place where the Russians were keeping their money, the UK. Hybrid war doesn't mean just being a nuisance on the internet. Hybrid war means cyber attacks, means arsons, means assassinations, means hostile actions in the Baltic Sea, in the English Channel, and so on. We have it all the time. And we need to take action. I've closed down a Russian consulate in Poland. We've reduced the area where Russian diplomats may travel to make it more difficult for them to service their agents. Our security services have agreed that the Russians who are trying to destroy the European Union should not benefit from the privileges of the Schengen area. So when you have a Russian diplomat in one EU country, they should be able to travel only in that EU country and not all over Europe, servicing agents perhaps in another country. These are very practical things that we can do to limit their capacity to do damage.
Minister Barrot, I just want to follow up on what I was saying about the Russia and what Minister Sikorski has just said. That is part of this effort to build European public support for this war, but also the broader effort it involves. Speaking more about the many layered aggression that we're now seeing from Russia, for the grey war, if you like.
Yes, indeed. And I agree with everything Radek just said. And if I referred earlier on with a perhaps provocative comment on the beginning of the 21st century, this is precisely because despite of all that happened, including in Ukraine with Russia, something radical happened on February of 2022. It is a fundamental mutation of the threat, a threat that has morphed into a full-scale invasion, with then Vladimir Putin internationalizing this war into Asia, and then weaponizing information, weaponizing migration against Poland, weaponizing energy prices, like he's been doing against Moldova and other countries in Europe, meaning that the threat has crossed a new threshold that requests from our end a new posture in terms of security for our continent. And this needs to be very clearly explained, because there is no going back to earlier years when the threat did not cross such a threshold. And this needs to be understood in Europe, but this also needs to be understood in the US. And I agree with what Radek said. Recent comments by representatives of the incoming administration tend to suggest that there is an understanding now in Washington that there is no possible bad deal for Ukraine that would at the same time be a good deal for Europe and the US.
Just to supplement what I said, because the confrontation with Russia has already melted the main, but it also goes beyond our continent. As we speak, there is an air bridge of Russian equipment from Syria to their bases in Libya. In Africa, Russia is engaging in a classic colonial exercise of sending mercenaries and soldiers and using despoiled African raw materials and wealth to extend Russia's influence in Africa. The southern tier of the European Union is, of course, affected by this. We should not permit Russia to capture permanently bases in Africa and to be able to do what they do on the Polish-Belarusian border, which is to switch on and off huge migration flows so as to try to enable politically the far right in the European Union, so as to destroy the European Union through the political process, because that's the objective.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, and I know that there will be lots. Just if you could keep them brief, and I'll be looking for the rising intonation at the end of a sentence that involves a question. Okay, here first.
John Chipman, Executive Chairman of the IISS. I wanted, with a rising question, to provide in 3 sentences the legal justification for seizing Russian state assets. And it is, and we've produced a 30-page paper with lawyers from 9 different countries that supports this. It is basically this, that there is total agreement that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal. When there is a peremptory breach of international law, it is open to states holding assets of that state to seize them in order to help the invader to comply with his legal obligation to pay reparations to the invaded state. This is not something without precedent. When, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Iraqi assets were seized to support Kuwait, not a poor country, in order to be able to repair the damages on the oil terminals that were destroyed by Saddam Hussein. So my rising intonation question is, could the European Union not agree that the French, the Germans, and others in Europe could offer this? Because Mr. Trump's next tweet could be, I will not use American money to support Ukraine, I will use Russian money.
So very quick response.
Well, I support it. I know that some colleagues are concerned about the effect that this would have on the euro currency. But I think a slight devaluation of the euro would be good for various economies, for France in particular.
I'll bring this home. if you allow me. Let's see how I'm welcome back in Paris.
Careful.
So I understand the argument. I wouldn't use it in this way if I was in the team of those that support this solution, because the financing needs of Ukraine for this year, they're covered by the G7 era loan. So what is it about when we talk about seizing the assets themselves? To me, it is mostly a way to bargain with Russia when the moment will come for negotiation peace, which again we think is the moment that the Ukrainians will decide. So it's less for me a question of funding liquidity needs for 2025 that seem to be covered in large part due to the European efforts, than a question of building up the strong position that we want Ukrainians to enter with into the negotiation talks. And for that, we have, of course, the sanctions, and we're discussing the 16th package of sanctions under the Polish presidency of the EU. We have the military support at the bilateral level that is going to keep building up throughout the year. And we have this Euro-Atlantic integration that some of us mentioned earlier that is also putting Ukraine in a strong position as when they decide to start the peace negotiations.
I just wanted to add, I mean, don't underestimate the decision that the G7 took on using windfall profits. That has never been done. We also thought for many years that would not be possible. We were presented with a legal after legal opinion saying, don't do this, your banks will refuse, this will set a precedent, this will give larger economies power over smaller ones. But we found ourselves in a situation where, what else can we do? Yes, sanction packages are being adopted. We also need to be honest with ourselves. There are still many loopholes in the packages that have been adopted already. So we would be on the side of let's also get our act together and making sure that if there are, with countries that say that they are implementing them, in essence, some of them are not. And I think it would be also time for us to come together and say, what have we done so far? What has not worked, but also what has worked in order for us to become more agile when it comes to taking decisions with allowing and helping Ukraine around that table if peace negotiations take place.
Okay, there was one, yeah, here. We'll take these two.
Thank you very much. I'm a journalist from Chinese media, Caixin. My question is mainly for the Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah, today we have talked a lot about the negotiation, potential ceasefire, and lots of conditions, but I would want to bring the attention to the economic rebuilding of your country. So can you share with some of the current blueprint and the pathway that if we can really have the ceasefire within this year, and how should Ukraine and how should other countries, including EU members or even the broader world, to contribute to the economic rebuilding plan in your society? And the second question is that we know that the participation of the Ukraine into EU is involved lots of the political calculation. But besides the formal recognition of a member of the EU membership, I think Ukrainian people would like to seek much stronger and broader social ties with the rest of Europe, and it should not be seized or should not be weakened even after the war. So what will be your call for the European population about their future relationship with the people of Ukraine?
That is a very good question. We're just going to take two together because we're going to run out of time.
Hi, this is Iqbal Dhaliwal from MIT. So my question is, given Trump's negotiating style and the domestic distractions in France and Germany, what leverage does Europe really have to ensure that its stakes are there in the negotiation? Like, why does this not become Trump negotiating with Putin, Ukraine a little bit involved, but the rest of Europe completely cut off despite its stakes? So what leverage do you have to ensure that that happens?
Okay, we'll have a moment on reconstruction before we get
so I probably would answer the first question. So I do believe that it would be inflow of foreign investment and a boost of activity of foreign companies and enlarge development of Ukrainian companies in case we would be sure that we would have the guarantees. I mean, now we have, of course, we are very grateful for Ukraine facility for this pillar 2 that actually help us to provide the European Commission providing guarantees, and private companies can step in Ukrainian market. But we understand that if we speak about the reconstruction in the broader sense, we would need to have guarantees. I would look at this like from business perspective. Business during Davos forum discussed with me, what can you offer to us? I mean, they're not asking for risk insurance because it's already in place. So we have risk insurance from EBRD, from DFC, from MIGA. So they're asking what there can be guarantees for business. And of course, we understand perfectly well that NATO is like naturally the best option, and like our president admitted yesterday, the cheapest one. But we understand that probably we should look at other solutions as well in parallel. And today, during the Ukrainian breakfast, I made an example on the seaports. So when at the beginning of the large-scale invasion, our ports have been fully blocked. And there was a deal brokered by UN, Turkey and Russia. Then Russia sabotaged this deal. And then there was option for us how to restart the activity, how to actually bring business back and open export. And I would say that the answer was anti-missile system in place. So that's why business also asking about very concrete things, and why they're what are their arguments for NATO? They are looking not for the, I would say, papers of for some legal documents, but they're looking for the military infrastructure in place that can really protect their business in Ukraine. So that's why I think that this guarantee is a prerequisite for the reconstruction, because I would say other infrastructure are already in place. And in terms of reforms, we keep working as well.
President Rinkevich, do you want to respond briefly to that? I mean, there is clearly a risk that any negotiation that happens, or at least a good part of the way forward for Ukraine, will be mapped through Truth Social posts and phone calls between Donald Trump and President Putin.
Well, but I think that the answer how Europe can be relevant is actually given already almost by each and every panelist. Number one, keep supporting Ukraine. If you are the player supporting of Ukraine, I think that everyone should take this into account. Sending all the military aid, also financial, economic support, and I know that there is ongoing discussion who does more, EU or the United States. Actually, the figures I'm seeing still show that actually the European Union is providing totally more support to Ukraine in all fields. So that's number one. Number two, I think that yes, we will need to have a very close contacts with US administration. We have to be, let's say, visible and present also in Washington when it comes to all those discussions. Leaders of EU member states, parliamentarians, everyone. There is no other way around.
But if President, I mean, as Radoslaw Sikorski pointed out, you have an or else threat in that post. In order to be part of this, the European also has to have an or else and has to be doing that. Whether it's, I mean, what are the tools that you could turn to? We've talked about the assets, but is it sanctioning of third country banks? Is it further energy sanctions?
Yes. You know, but here actually, I'm the former foreign minister for almost 12 years, so I know how all those Foreign Affairs Council discussions sometimes happen, and I'm sure nothing has changed since I've left almost 2 years ago. Look, we do have still issues that we have to address. Secondary sanctions when it comes to the EU sanctions. We don't have those. US have. Number two, we do have the situation which we need to address because loopholes involve third countries. Exports to some countries have doubled, tripled, or even, I don't know, have become 10 times. And then we still have also things that we need to address. For instance, we have started sanctioning Russian shadow fleet. But look at the figures. I was watching EU 79, UK 110, US 180 something. And from that point of view, yes, if Europe wants to be a player, then apart from having all those nice discussions, also real decisions must be taken. But I also know what it takes to get all 27 to agree.
But,
that's not an easy.
You know that, but we've got two of them on the end there.
That's their job, actually.
Can we get you two to agree, and will that be will this agenda be a priority for the Polish presidency? The deepening of the sanctions, following the US, and providing a European or else to this pressure on Russia?
Well, I hope that the government of Hungary has read the message from the President of the United States,
just about maintaining
and that we
what we
pass the sanctions, and then we have another package, and yes, we need to close loopholes. The US has it easier because it's a unitary state. We are a confederation. Of course, it's more difficult for us to have the kind of practical instruments of sanctions enforcement that they have at the Treasury Department, where thousands of people work on this. We need to devote more resources to actually affecting our sanctions. I agree with that. But there are positive things that we could still do. The money, as you were saying earlier, for European defense has to come from somewhere, either from increased contributions by the member states, or from EU funds, or from debt. I don't think we want to pay more, but we certainly could make own resources of the EU bigger to service the COVID-era loans and also to address a new emergency, which is defense. We also have huge amounts of money squirreled away from unspent programs, including from the money that member states have not spent from the COVID recovery funds. There are some low-hanging fruits as regards money.
Minister Barrot, I'm just thinking specifically on the low-hanging fruits. The people who have to be persuaded to pick it, among other things, are the Germans. We had the current Chancellor here in Davos and also the quite likely future Chancellor. Have you been talking to them about that?
Well, what we've seen over this past year is a lot of opening up to finding innovating means of financing. Yes, we have on the eastern flank, on the Nordic flank of our union, including Germany, where our colleague from the outgoing administration, Annalena Baerbock, has been very forthcoming with the idea that at some point to overcome the debt break in Germany, some innovative EU funding might be needed given the level of the challenges in terms of security that are ahead. But I just want to respond to the European leverage question that was asked by the MIT professor earlier today. What we're saying is that there is no discussion about Ukraine that can happen without the Ukrainians, and no discussion about European security without the Europeans. Why? Well, because suppose, and I don't think this is going to happen, that there would be a discussion between the US administration and Vladimir Putin. Any deal that might be struck would have to be agreed upon by the Ukrainians that have been fighting for 3 years for their territorial integrity and for our security. And then it will have to be agreed upon by Europeans. We'll have to play the first role in terms of delivering the security guarantees to enforce such a deal. Otherwise, who will do it? Is it NATO? So far, the US administration has not shown to be super open for short-term accession of Ukraine to NATO, which means that there is a transitory period where security guarantees will need to be provided in some alternative way in connection with NATO. The 200,000 troops that President Zelensky mentioned yesterday here in Davos, is it the US that is going to provide them? Here is the leverage.
But is it, who else is going to provide them then?
This is not the point. The point is
It
that
is the point.
the point is that the question was about European leverage, and what the Europe wants is a just and sustainable peace. We think that the US can play a very important role in reaching this peace by putting maximum pressure on Vladimir Putin, that so far has demonstrated zero intention to negotiate a just and durable peace. The responsibility of Europeans at large, including Ukrainians, will be to enforce such a deal, and that's why they need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Look, if you're trying to prove that the US has a stronger hand on this than we do, it's obvious. For them, it's a war of choice. For us, it's a war of necessity. Not to mention Ukraine, of course. And on the money, just look at the alignment of opinions on debt or on the assets. Finland and the Netherlands have traditionally been frugal countries.
Yeah.
And yet on this, they're gun-ho.
Okay. We've run out of time, and we probably could go for another hour, but I appreciate the lively conversation we've had, and I would say I'm glad that we have been able to focus on Ukraine for this hour, if not necessarily for all of this week. But thank you to all the speakers, and thank you for everyone here.